If you're under 30 years of age, you're probably not intimidated by the little button on your phone progressing PowerPoint, but for me, I find it just amazing. Truck drivers. What image comes to your mind when you think of truck drivers? Is it good? Is it bad? Before you say anything, remember, I spent about 20 years of my life as a truck driver. And I assure you, there are some bad truck drivers out there, but there are a lot of good truck drivers. Charlie and Bubba. A lot of truck drivers start their driving career at a truck driving school. And the story is told about Charlie, who decided he wanted to be a truck driver, and he went to truck driving school. And there the instructor asked Charlie a question. The instructor said, "Charlie, you're driving out in California, and you're going down Donner Pass. Donner Pass starts out at nearly 7,000 feet in elevation and a gap in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and it drops heading west all the way down to almost sea level. It's almost a 7,000-foot drop. It's long, and in places it's very steep. And Charlie, you let your brakes get hot, and now your brakes aren't working anymore. Charlie, you're a team driver. Bubba is in the sleeper. What are you going to do? Your truck is going faster and faster, and you have no brakes." Charlie thought for a while. He said, "Well, I believe I'd wake up Bubba." The instructor's a little surprised. "You wake up Bubba?" He said, "Sure." I'd say, "Bubba, you ain't never seen a wreck like the one we're about to have." While truckers watch their freight by night, this is the third Sunday of our Advent season, and the traditional theme for today is about the shepherds and about joy. And you notice in our Advent reading, we did read about joy. But I would like to focus on the shepherds and ask the question, why shepherds? I sometimes wonder if Jesus were to be born today, would he show up in a truck stop? I think that perhaps truckers in our culture today fill a very similar niche to what shepherds did in their culture of their day. So, if Jesus were born today, perhaps the angels would appear at a truck stop. And perhaps the Bible would say, in the same region, there were some truckers staying at the Flying J and keeping watch over their freight by night. But 2,000 years ago, there were no trucks, and there were no truck drivers, and so this is the way the story is recorded in Luke. In the same regions, shepherds were staying out in the fields, keeping watch over their flock. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Don't be afraid, for look, I proclaim to you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. Today a Savior, who is Messiah the Lord, was born for you in the city of David. This will be a sign for you. You will find the baby wrapped snugly in cloth and lying in a manger." Suddenly there was a multitude of the heavenly host with the angel, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and peace on earth to people he favors." Truckers are the bad guys. And truckers are the good guys. Now, some people sleep during the sermon, so if you're one of those people and you want to take your nap, hold on a second. I'll give you my 3 points right now, then you can take your nap. This is point 1. Point 2, truckers are often overlooked and looked down on, and truckers are the essential guys. And shepherds too. Shepherds were the bad guys, and shepherds were the good guys. Shepherds were often overlooked and looked down on, and shepherds were the essential guys. But I ask today, why shepherds? For one thing, the Bible is very sheepy from the very beginning to the very end. We find this in the book of Genesis, chapter 4, verse 2, and Abel was a keeper of the flocks. Abel was a shepherd, and Abel was one of the sons of Adam and Eve. And then if we go to the very back of the Bible, in Revelation chapter 7, 17, and this is an interesting play, the Lamb is a shepherd. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and will guide them to springs of the water of life. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Of course, you know, the Old Testament was originally written in the Hebrew language. The Hebrew word ro'i is what we translate as shepherd. But oftentimes it is used figuratively to represent the relationship of a ruler to subjects and of the relationship to God and man. And this was not unique to the Hebrew culture. Hammurabi, who was an ancient Babylonian, he referred to himself as a shepherd of his people. And Homer, the Greek poet, referred to the Greek chieftains as shepherds of their people. And then in the New Testament, which of course was originally written in Greek, the word was poimen, and we translate that shepherd. And it is also used figuratively in the Bible, especially to represent Jesus Christ as a shepherd of the church. And then specifically, there's sort of a call on all of us. If we are followers of Christ, we are called to be good shepherds like Christ. And then there's sort of a specific application. When we say pastor, that Greek word actually has its root in the word poimen, in being a shepherd. I ask, why shepherds? Shepherds, and this is my first point, shepherds and truckers are the bad guys and the good guys. Are truckers bad guys? Well, I truck drove for 20 years. To be honest with you, I met a lot of good drivers, and I don't know that I ever met one that was what I would consider a really bad person. But I guess I would say if you're being a bad driver, you're not doing the right thing. And in my 20 years, I tried to be a careful, courteous driver, but I wasn't always. And one time I was pulling a load of paper from Christiansburg, Virginia down to Roanoke. And you drop about 1,000 feet in elevation. And I was fully loaded, and I came on a long line of trucks that were going around these curves real slow. So I thought, I think I can pass this whole long line until we get to the bottom of the hill. And so I got out in the hammer lane, and I let it go faster and faster, and I was going pretty fast. And I heard somebody say on the radio, "Here comes one at you, doing it like he wants to." I thought, here comes one at you, doing it like he wants to. And I thought, oh, he's talking about me. And he's talking to a full-grown bear. You know what a full-grown bear is? Full-grown bear was truck lingo for a state trooper. He's talking to him about me. So I slowed down, and just in time I slowed down to the speed limit, there he was, kind of tucked in the woods. So, yeah, sometimes I was a bad driver. But there are good drivers as well. Margaret, my wife, and Miriam King. Miriam King, you may know, attends Mountain View Mennonite Church. They were going to a conference in Asheville, and their car broke down in Black Mountain. And a truck driver stopped and picked them up and gave them a ride to the top of the mountain and took them to the exit where they needed to get off in Asheville. And he said that it's against company policy to pick up riders. And I think we understand that. There's liability issues, as well as if you pick somebody up, you're not quite sure who they are. But this was a good driver. He said, you know, I wanted to do the right thing. So certainly there are good drivers, but if drivers are similar in our culture today to what shepherds were in our culture then, were there bad shepherds then? Were there bad shepherds? Certainly in Ezekiel we read about bad shepherds. This is in chapter 34. And as we read about the bad shepherds in the Bible, let's think about the opposite. What is really being said about what does it mean to be a good shepherd? Woe, shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding themselves. Should not the shepherds feed the flock? You eat the fat, and clothe yourselves with the wool. You slaughter the fat sheep without feeding the flock. Those who are sickly, you have not strengthened. The diseased, you have not healed. The broken, you have not bound up, the scattered you have not brought back, nor have you sought the lost, but with force and with severity you have dominated them. This guy was a bad shepherd. You probably don't recognize him. His name was Boleslas the Cruel. He lived in the 900s, and he was a duke in Central Europe. And his name, Boleslas the Cruel, was well earned. Now, the 900s were a long time ago, and so some of the truths of his story is lost in time. But it appears he had a brother who was the duke. And it's likely that his brother was actually a twin brother, but just slightly older. And so the older twin was the duke. And this guy wanted to be duke. And so one day when the older brother was going to church, of all places, this guy murdered his brother so that he could become duke. And he was a bad shepherd of his people. Boleslas the Cruel. Good shepherds. Are there good shepherds in the Bible? I would say absolutely yes. And what I'd like to do is have us trace through the Bible and find Jesus Christ as the good shepherd and as the model for us to be good shepherds. And we'll begin with David. David as a model of what Jesus was to be yet to come. Not a perfect model, an imperfect model. Then we will look in the Old Testament at prophecy of Jesus to come as the good shepherd. We will see then in the New Testament that Jesus lived as the Good Shepherd. And then we will see in the New Testament that there is a call on us to model our lives after Christ and for us to be good shepherds. But let's start with David being a model of the Good Shepherd Christ was yet to come, an imperfect model. But in Psalm 78 we read, "He also chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfold, from the care of the ewes with suckling lambs. He brought him to shepherd Jacob his people, and Israel his inheritance. So he shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them with his skillful hands." And then let's look at prophecy of Jesus Christ to come as the Good Shepherd. Like a shepherd, he will tend his flock. In his arms he will gather the lambs, and carry them in his bosom. He will gently lead the nursing ewes. And that's found in Isaiah chapter 40. And then let's find the reality of Jesus Christ as the Good Shepherd in the New Testament. This from the book of John. "I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I am the Good Shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me, and I lay down my life for the sheep." And finally, in the New Testament, we find this call to all of us that we are to be good shepherds. And what I like to do, I'm going to try to read this passage of Scripture and put the words "we" and "us" in there. And this passage, it's a well-known passage. Jesus is talking to Peter, but Jesus is also talking to us, and he's calling us to be good shepherds. You get a little closer so I can see it. Jesus says to us, "Hey, you guys, do you love me more than these?" And we say to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that we love you." And he says to us, "Tend my lambs." He says to us again, "Hey, you guys, do you love me?" And we say to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that we love you." And he says to us, "Shepherd my sheep." He says to us a third time, "Hey, you guys, do you love me?" And we agree because he said this to us 3 times. And "Do you love me?" And we say to him, "Yes, you know all things. You know that we love you." And Jesus says to us, "Tend my sheep." Okay, this guy's a good shepherd. Remember Boleslas the Cruel? This is the brother he murdered, and some people believe that it was actually his twin brother that was murdered. He lived in the 900s. He was duke for a while, but his life had some rough spots from beginning to end. When he was young, his father, who was a Christian and who was duke, died, and he was put to the care of his mother, who was a pagan, and tried to lead him away from Christian influence. But then he went to live with his grandmother, who was a Christian, and during this time, he committed his life to Christ. And this, I think, was the foundation in his life for his becoming a good shepherd of his people. And indeed, he did become a good shepherd. He is known for many of the good deeds that he did, and I'd like to read a passage from a magazine. This is actually from Charisma magazine. I'm sorry, this was from a writing done. I've got the wrong one. But there was a guy back in the 1100s, which was around 900 years after this guy lived, and he wrote about this duke as being a good shepherd of his people. And I may not have brought that along with me. If I can't find it, I will just tell you about it. This guy was known to get up at night in his bare feet. He'd walk to the churches, and he would give offerings for the poor people, to care for the poor people, to care for the widows, to provide food for the hungry. And even though a lot of the reality of him has been lost in time, a poem was written about him in the 1800s. This poem talks about him being a good king. Does anybody have any idea what his name is? We sing about him at Christmas time. No help? Wenceslas. Of course, the story told in the song Good King Wenceslas talks about the Feast of Stephen, which is really not during the Christmas time. That we sing about at Christmas because the Feast of Stephen is right after Christmas. And I hope today, if it works out, we're going to close our service today singing about Good King Wenceslas and how he was a good shepherd. So I ask, why shepherds? When we look at the bad trucker, good trucker thing, when we look at the bad shepherd, good shepherd thing, I believe that this is to point us to the good shepherd, whom we too should worship and serve as Lord. I ask, why shepherds? Point number 2, shepherds and truckers were often overlooked and looked down on. I didn't record who wrote this. I think I found it in a trucking magazine. I think the typical image of a truck driver includes a middle-aged male who is tired, dirty, hasn't showered in a week, hopped up on drugs, legal or otherwise, searching for prostitutes while wearing an old torn flannel shirt and ball cap. Most people think drivers are uneducated too. While there are definitely some truck drivers that meet this description, it's usually far from the truth. And also, this quote comes from a blog Bethany wrote on One Girl Trucking. The media has a knack for portraying many of us as unprofessional, unkept, incapable road hogs, drifters, hoodlums, and worse. If truckers today are looked down on, were shepherds in their day looked down on? And I think at least in some ways they were. Alan Perkins is pastor of a church in Ohio. He wrote that they, the shepherds, were the last people you'd expect God to take notice of. He went on to say that they were religious outcasts. They were unclean, unable to attend feasts and holy days. And that they were also borderline social outcasts. They were looked on with suspicion, often accused of being thieves, and they were not allowed to give legal testimony. So then Alan Perkins asked the question, so why did God send angels first to the shepherds? God wanted to show that his love does not discriminate on the basis of class or wealth or social standing. He does not respect kings and princes more than hourly laborers. He does not value priests and pastors above people in the pews. God does not show favoritism. He does not give preferential treatment to one group of people over another. His love is available to all on the same basis, faith in Jesus Christ and faith alone. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 26 to 31. And when we think about good shepherds and not overlooking people and not looking down on people, I think it's really sort of a two-pronged thought. One is that God, as a good shepherd, does not overlook anyone. God does not look down on anyone. So no matter who we are, no matter how we feel about ourselves, we can be assured that God does not overlook us. God does not look down on us. But the second prong of this thought is that we are to be good shepherds modeled after Christ. And so we need to be sure that we do not overlook others and we do not look down on others. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Brothers, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things, so that no one may boast before him. Okay, if you're napping, you can wake up now. It's quiz time. Vernon guessed that we were talking about good King Wenceslas. Any ideas who this lady is? She was born in 1867 in Ireland. She entered a life of ministry. I believe she's a good example of what a good shepherd is, modeled after Jesus Christ, the good shepherd. Somebody say something?
Amy Carmichael. Amy Carmichael?
Amy Carmichael, very good. She began a ministry when she was about 20 years old in Ireland to the Shawleys. Shawleys were young women who worked in the textile mills in Ireland, and they wore shawls on their heads, so they were called Shawleys. They were too poor to actually wear hats. Then later she went into overseas ministry, even though she was quite sickly. First she traveled to Japan, then she traveled to Sri Lanka, and finally she ended up in India, where she found her life mission work. In India, she discovered that there were young girls who were dedicated to the Hindu temples who were taken into prostitution so that the priests could earn money. And she made it her mission to save these girls. And it is said that she would travel miles on long, hot, dusty roads in India to save just one child. Later in her life, she had a bad fall and she was bedridden for 20 years. But this did not stop her ministry. She continued to write books. It's thought that she wrote more than 25 books in her lifetime, and some are still in print today. She died in 1951 in India. She should have made India her home. She even dressed an Indian dress. After her death, her ministry continued in India and continues to this day, working with those that culture tends to overlook and look down on. This man is Wilfredo de Jesus. In the 1970s, he was living in Chicago where he had been born. There were riots in Chicago in the 1970s. It's a little bit like today. People were rioting over police brutality and over racism. And de Jesus kind of got caught up in the riots. And one day as a 12-year-old, he broke into a store and he stole a soda. He went running down the street with his soda, but something inside of de Jesus said, that's not right. So he actually took the soda back. He had a rather rough childhood. His father was an alcoholic, and his father left the home when de Jesus was 8 years old. He failed third grade, largely because he simply couldn't read. But he did join a program run by the city of Chicago, and he thought he'd be assigned to work cleaning streets. But he was assigned to a youth program that was headquartered at a church. And there he met some church people. And these church people were good shepherds to him. And he became a Christian. And he attended that church. And I think it was around the year 2000, he actually became pastor of that church. When he became pastor, the church had about 70 members. Today, the church has, on 4 campuses, about 17,000 members. And I do have this one. This is the one from Charisma magazine. A little word about his ministry and how I think he is a good shepherd, caring for those who culture tends to overlook and culture tends to look down on. New Life, which is the name of his church, has 17,000 through 4 church campuses and boasts more than 130 ministries, reaching the most destitute, the homeless, prostitutes, drug addicts, and gang members. These multifaceted development programs offer everything from food and clothing, to transitional shelters, residential recovery, and job training centers, mobile soup kitchens for the homeless and shut-ins, gang and at-risk youth intervention, human trafficking advocacy, world missions and humanitarian relief, after-school tutoring and sports programming, mentoring, prison outreach. Lots of ways that his ministry is reaching those in need. So I ask, why shepherds? Second point, to remind us that God, as the Good Shepherd, does not, and we as his followers should not, overlook or look down on anyone. And I ask again, why shepherds? Point 3, truckers and shepherds are the essential guys. I say it, and you may hear other truck drivers say it, if you got it, a truck brought it. There are nearly 2 million heavy trucks drivers in the United States. They generate about $650 billion in gross revenue. And that amounts to about 7% of the total workforce being involved in trucking. So, if truckers are essential today, were shepherds essential 2,000 years ago? I say yes, especially because in that culture, sheep were essential. They were used for meat, for milk, for skins, and for wool. And they were well suited for the hilly, rocky countryside, and especially because that environment was very dry. This is from the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, and I didn't look it up. New South Wales is in Australia, or is it New Zealand? But they say that cattle require 40 to 100 liters of water a day, horses 40 to 50 liters of water a day, but sheep generally only require 2 to 6 liters of water a day. But how about sheep? Sheep need a shepherd, and so shepherds are essential. Sheep tend to wander off. They tend to get lost. They are vulnerable to predators. They are easily frightened and confused. And I wrote they are poor at feral life. Cats can do pretty well living wild. Dogs can do reasonably well living wild. Even horses can go wild or live a feral life. But generally, sheep are not good at the wild life. Generally, they need to have a shepherd. Even a sheep catcher is essential. The year after I graduated from college and getting ready to enter seminary, I worked part-time as a sheep catcher. My job, and I worked with a guy named Donnie Armstrong, who was a 5th-generation sheep catcher out of Highland County, Virginia. And we'd go to a farm in the morning and we'd round up however many sheep they wanted to shear that day. Sometimes it was 80 or more sheep. And we put them in a corral near where the shearer had set up to shear sheep. It was my job to go to the